Hello to all of you. I think that we can start. It's a great pleasure to have here with us in this research seminar, Dr. Angeliki Pantazi from IBM Research-Zurich. She is going to give a talk on brain-inspired computing. And it is in the context of the activities that we have in the WiSE group in CSD, trying to build essentially bridges of research collaboration with various researchers internationally. And also in the context of the Neurons Net, Marie Curie project that we have here at Forth, and IBM also participates in this project. So in the area of neuromorphic computing, there are exciting opportunities for collaborative multidisciplinary research that bridges computation neuroscience and development of bio-inspired technologies. And this is exactly the topic of the talk that Dr. Angeliki is going to give us. And I believe that computation neuroscience is entering a new great era, perhaps a renaissance, where there is this integration of the principles of modules of computation in deep learning architectures and also in hardware. And this integration is really underway. So today, our speaker is going to give a presentation on neuromorphic computing and the very important activities that she is running at IBM Zurich. So let me say a few things about Angeliki. Angeliki is a very talented researcher, and I believe that she can be a great role model for our students. She's a principal research staff member and a research manager at the IBM Research-Zurich in Switzerland. She received her diploma and PhD in electrical engineering and computer technology from the University of Patras in Greece. And since 2006, she's a researcher in IBM Research-Zurich, and currently actually she is managing the neuromorphic computing and IO links group. She was named IBM Master Inventor in 2014. She has received a lot of prizes for her papers and her industrial achievements. And she has an impressive number of granted patents already and 100 referred articles. So it's really great to have you, Angeliki, here with us. To give this presentation in your research activities. So let me also mention that this talk is going to be recorded and it's going to be in English. So thank you all for attending the talk, and the floor is yours, Angeliki.
Thank you, Maria, for this kind introduction and for the invitation to give this lecture today. It's my pleasure to discuss today with you this topic. Let me first share my screen. Can you see the slides well?
Yes, everything is fine.
Okay, so as Maria mentioned, today I will give an overview on the activities that we are having in the team around brain-inspired computing. Before I start with the topic, this is like just one slide of a short introduction of the IBM Zurich lab, that it is one of IBM's research labs worldwide, and it is a part of the other total 7 labs that form the IBM Research Europe and Africa, as you can see in the figure here. We have a lot of collaborations with universities, and also we have the pleasure with Maria to collaborate in the NeuronXNets project, which is like also part of this lecture today. One of the most remarkable achievements of the lab was the 2 Nobel Prizes that have received from researchers from our lab. And with that short introduction, I will go to the topic of today's presentation, which is around brain-inspired computing. So as the name implies, the brain-inspired computing, what it tries to achieve is to take inspiration from neuroscience and from what we know from biology and how biology works, and use this kind of concepts in order to make the next generation computing systems. The key paradigm that brain-inspired computing is based is called the spiking neural networks. And the spiking neural network has several key features that are inspired from biology. First of all, as the name implies, in this kind of systems, the information is being encoded in events. So that's why the name spikes, and the way the information is being encoded is in time between the different events. But even though sometimes, because of the name spiking neural network, people believe that the only feature that they have from biology is like the communication with the spikes. Actually, there are a lot more features that make these networks very powerful. And for example, I have listed a few more here. The neurons, the dynamics of the neurons, they have rich characteristics, and they are having adaptive features. This is like a characteristic that it is becoming very critical, especially when we are talking about applications that they have to change or adapt to external environmental conditions. So besides the neural dynamics, also the synapses, which is the connections between the neuron, these are also having interesting plasticity characteristics, for example, the so-called short and long-term plasticity characteristics. And last but not least is like the learning, where we can get inspiration of the local, supervised or unsupervised learning techniques. This is like a few of the features that they made these types of networks to having great promise in order to improve in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of the memory requirements, in terms of making the next generation AI system more smart and capable. But of course, there are several challenges associated in order to make this kind of system fulfill this promise. And here I have listed 3 of them, and during the presentation we will touch a little bit on the research that we are doing in order to overcome these challenges. For example, until recently there was no general training approach that allowed this kind of networks to achieve high accuracy and scalability as their ANN counterparts have achieved. Second, I have named before a lot of key features, but we have to demonstrate still how all these unique features can substantially impact AI applications and how they can be utilized. And at the end, if the last 2 is more of the algorithmic challenges, the last one is like how utilizing concepts from biology we can create energy efficient neuromorphic accelerators. And by that, what I said, you basically understand that this requires research elements along the whole stack of an AI system. And with this short introduction around on what it is like the challenges and opportunities of the brain-inspired computing, I will move to the outline of today's talk, where I will try to explain a few of the areas that we are working, and I will start with the biologically inspired neural dynamics. Then I will move to the concept of online learning. I will briefly introduce the in-memory computing, and I will conclude the talk with some interesting applications where this kind of concepts have been applied and have demonstrated their efficiency. So starting with the biologically inspired neural dynamics. I will give here in this slide, it's like a very busy slide, but I will just would like to highlight a few things on from the history of how the neural networks have been involved since 1906, when Ramon and Cajal has received the Nobel Prize, where through his work we realized what is the structure of the nervous system and how the neurons are interconnected with the synapses. From that work, there were actually two paths that they have been created. One that it basically took inspiration more from the structure of the biological neural networks, and this is led to the artificial neural network paradigm, starting from 1943, where McCulloch and Pitts have basically presented the simplest artificial neuron, which was basically taking a weighted sum of neural inputs. This was going through a nonlinear function and then it producing an output. After that, there was a lot of things that based on this have been progressed the research, moving to the perceptron, then going to the 80s with the back propagation that improved how we can learn representations with this kind of system, moving to more complicated neural units like the LSTM, and then reaching the last decade, where basically through the power of the large-scale processing systems, the GPUs, and the processing power, this led us to the deep learning revolutions and all the advancements that we have seen that the ANN system have provided. Now going to the part in the second avenue, where initially this was followed by neuroscientists that they wanted to understand how the brain operates, and the idea was that to create and emulate the dynamics with a more biorealistic aspect, so being more closer to the biology than the previous path. And here we start with 1952 with the King and Huxley, where they modeled the spiking neural dynamics and they received the Nobel Prize. Then there was a lot of work on how this kind of spiking neural networks architecture, reaching to the 80s with the work around neuromorphic engineering and learning algorithms. And again, through all this work, basically culminated all this ongoing effort in order in the last decade again to create these neuromorphic accelerators where we can take into advantage the benefits of this kind of networks in terms of low power and efficiency. And what I would like to highlight with this slide is basically all these two paths, they were moving in parallel for quite some time. But as you will see, recently there are works, including the work that we are doing, that they bridge these two kind of worlds, and they try to take the benefit of both approaches and the advances that had happened in both fields until now. And exactly this brings me to the concept of the spiking neural units, which is the basis of the research in this neuro-inspired dynamics that we are doing. And I would like to take some time to introduce before I can show you what kind of results we are having with these units. As I mentioned at the beginning, the key idea is that we take inspirations from concepts from biology and then find a way to create and map them in artificial intelligent systems and deep learning. For example, what you see on the left is a schematic of a biological neuron, where you see the dendrites that they take the information of in the form of spikes. This information is being accumulated in the soma of the neuron in the state that it's being called membrane potential. And then when the value of this membrane potential potential reaches a certain threshold, then there is like a spike emitted at the axon of the neuron, and it is like communicated to the other neurons. So this is what is called the leaky integrate and fire neuron. This is like a known concept of a biological neuron. And what we have done with the spiking neural unit is we have mapped this biologically inspired concept in a way that it can be seamlessly integrated to all the common AI frameworks and to be able to utilize all the advances in the field of ANN. So what is described here with this equation of the leaky integrate and fire neuron, it is described in this block diagram using a combination of recurrent neural units. For example, it consists of two neurons, one that emulates the membrane potential and the accumulation of the input. And when the output of this membrane potential goes to the second neuron that emulates the spiking state. So it acts like monitoring if it crosses the threshold, and then if the threshold is crossed, then it is emitting a spike at the output. And when the spike is being emitted, then through this looping connection to the other neurons, it resets the membrane potential, and the operation, it keeps going. So basically with this simple concept, what is being achieved is like this neuron now, it is being described in this block or in the form of the equation below, and it can be considered like a Lego block that then you can take any neural network architecture and insert it in place of the neurons, and then have like a network and the deep network of spiking neurons. So basically with this kind of construct, what it was achieved is like two main things. First of all, that, as I said, this could be seamlessly integrated to the current AI frameworks, meaning that all the advances for the training, for example, using backpropagation through time, can now be used for the spiking neural networks and allow us to go to deep networks and achieve high accuracy with this kind of system. And the second advantage is that it is modular and extensive and flexible. For example, by changing what is like the activation function here and moving away from a step function that it has a threshold, and going to a more soft activation, then we can relax that constraint of having to communicate with 0 and 1s. And we have created another variant that we called soft SNU, and you will see some results of that in the future. So this is like there were two main benefits, and we will see now next how this kind of allow us to achieve improved performance in deep spiking neural networks. Before I go to the results, I would like with this slide here to show how this SNU, which is like drawn here in the way that typically the recurrent neural network units are being drawn, like the LSTM and GRUs. This is like the state of the art on the recurrent neural networks today. And basically you can see how this biologically inspired unit, it compares with the other units. What one can see immediately is basically that there are different internal dynamics, so it doesn't replicate anything of the existing units. And second, immediately one can understand that this unit is simpler than the LSTMs or the GRUs. And what this means that it will require much less operation in order to perform the functionality that is needed. And we will see how this, at the end, it can become beneficial, but already you can understand by reducing the number of operations, then we can go to reducing the computational cost and improving the energy efficiency of the systems. This is like how the SNU compares with the LSTMs and GRUs. And in these slides, you see what I mentioned before, that this is only the beginning. So this way of modeling the biological neural dynamics It is modular, and it can be extended with further concepts coming from neuroscience. And as we know more and more concepts, or we study more of them, then this can be incorporated in this kind of framework and have all the benefits that I described before, that they can be seamlessly incorporated in existing neural network architecture. What you see in this slide is like the SNU that I described at the beginning, and two more variants of this SNU. And key concepts that we have utilized in these two variants, they are shown in the schematic on the left side. So, for example, the SNU, it uses what they call these axodendritic connections. For example, as I mentioned in the beginning, the communication between neurons is happening when a spike is coming at the axon and is connected to the dendrite of the other neuron. This is the axodendritic connections through axodendritic synapses. But in biology, we know that this is not the only type of connectivity that one can have. For example, there are axo-axonic synapses, meaning that the axon of two neurons, they are being connected, or axosomatic synapses, meaning that the axon of one neuron goes and it is connected directly to the soma of the other neuron. And this kind of inspiration allowed us to make the two variants of the SNU. The middle one, using these axosomatic synapses, you see here that the connection from the other neurons, it doesn't go to the input, to the dendrite, it goes directly to the inside operation of the neuron, and it affects the internal dynamic of the neuron itself. The last variant in this figure here, it uses the axo-axonic synapses, meaning that the axon of the neuron is connected to the axon of the other neuron, so that the outputs are connected. This is like kind of, we consider like an output modulation. So you see that the connection of the other neurons, it goes directly to the output of this neuron. And of course, there are a lot of more rich dynamics that one can consider, but these are, with these two examples, I would like to emphasize that basically this concept of SNU, it is not like a simple unit, but it's just a framework that it is modular and extensible, and we can help us model new dynamics, and through the simulations with different kind of applications, we can get a better understanding of how these neural dynamics operate. And basically now I'm going to the results. I will show a few results of how the SNU, and here at the beginning I will only focus on the simplest version of the SNU with the leaky integrate and fire neuron, both in the spiking mode, but also in the soft mode, the one that I said that we could relax the output of the neuron producing 0 and 1s. And here you see two examples of for the digit recognition task using rate encoded input using the MNIST dataset. The top is for fully connected architecture, and the bottom result is for convolutional architecture. What you see here with the orange are the results from the SNU, the spiking and the soft SNU for 4-layer and 7-layer deep SNU networks. And the blue are the bars for the typical RNN, plain RNN, LSTM, and GRUs. Basically, you can see that with the SNU, we can achieve the best performance compared to the other units. And this is being achieved with a number of, with the time be reduced by 8x. So this is happening because, as I described before, this unit is much simpler, require much less multiplication, and this immediately translates to the training time when you have a network, not only the training, but also the inference. So not only we can achieve better performance, but this can be achieved with benefits also in the time that the network needs in order to run. Then here we are going to more complicated convolutional architecture, where we have achieved the record SNN accuracy of 99.53%. And this is like because using this kind of structure, we are able to take into advantage all the training methodology from the ANNs and applying them to the spiking neural networks. In the next slide, I demonstrate more applications. I won't go too much into the detail here. Actually, all these results are in the paper that it was cited before, this paper here. The only message that I would like to pass here is that we have tried different data sets, and also data sets that the performance is like the top performance and the state of the art is with ANN networks. Then this is language modeling using prediction, weather prediction, and then we can see that all of them we were able to provide the best result, especially with the units that they are the softest in use, but also with the spiking version, the results were comparable. And in order to say that what I said in the introduction, that using this kind of framework, it is actually we are bridging the spiking neural networks with the ANNs, and the spiking neural networks and the biologically inspired neural networks, they can also have comparable and even better results with the traditional ANN networks. And basically, to summarize this first part of the talk, you are welcome if you would like to find further information. This is like described in the paper in the Nature Machine Intelligence here, the theory of that. But also we have recently open sourced part of this work, so you are welcome to try out the code. There are also some examples from the ones that they described here, and further information on how you can utilize this kind of units in your applications. And with that, I finished with the first part of the presentation, that it was around the biologically inspired neural dynamics and how this kind of dynamics, they can have and provide improvements in deep learning in terms of efficiency, both energy efficiency, computational cost, and still maintaining competitive performance, and in some cases even better with the traditional ANN. And now we are moving to another important aspect of next generation AI system, and also here we try to use biological inspiration in order to perform online learning. And let me introduce what I mean with online learning. So to the results that I have shown up until now, I mentioned that we are doing the training of the neural network using backpropagation through time. And what I mean by that, there is like, I will play the first video here, where basically you can see how one can train with the backpropagation through time and network. For example, the network receives inputs and outputs as it is running in the forward pass of the network. Then when the sequencing finishes, it actually the stop operation stops, and the network is being unrolled in time and goes backward in time by taking the information from what is the actual output and what it is the error. Then it calculates the gradient, and then it produces the error, and using that error, then it updates the weights. So this kind of operation, even though it has been proven really powerful, it has a few drawbacks. For example, as I mentioned, we run the network forward through an input sequence, and then we have to stop the operation, unroll the network in time, and this is like a function of how big is the sequence, and then run the network operation backward using the error information in order to update the weights of the system. So this implies that the memory and the time requirements and the operations that we need, they grow with what is like the input sequence. And this is like critical, for example, in cases that we have data that they are coming online and continuously, we cannot afford to stop the operation, go backward in time and do the training, but we would like that we do the learning while the information is happening. And this is like what is happening with the online learning, which is like you can see the video now. So as the network receives the information, it produces the output, it calculates the error again, and then it updates the weight at the same time that the network is running. So you see that all the information is similar. It's just that when we are doing online learning, we do this same calculation as the network is running the forward pass. And this is like important as we discuss for latency, memory requirements, and so on. The way we tackle this problem of making a system that it runs using online learning is again taking inspiration through biology, and specifically of the concepts of eligibility traces and learning signal. So what are the eligibility traces? We know from neuroscientific insights that the biological neuron maintain a temporal trace of the past neuronal events, and this is like what is called eligibility trace. So in each synapses, so there is like an information that it is capturing the information, the memory of the previous events. Then there's a notion of the learning signals. These are such, for example, the dopamine or serotonin, that these are like originated now from the environment or from other brain regions, and these are propagated now, especially from all these different neurons, and transport this information to the neurons. So what we use in the concept of online learning is this notion of these two signals from biology, and this is like where we have designed online learning alternatives to the backpropagation through time algorithm that I presented before. We call this algorithm online spatiotemporal learning, or otherwise OSTL, because actually what it does, it is trying to separate the gradients in two types, the spatial and the temporal. So for example, as we said, we have learning signal that they pass information through different ranges of the brain or from the environment, through space. Then we represent the spatial gradients with the learning signals, and the temporal gradients that there are actually store the information in the time. We call them eligibility traces. And then what we do is we start with a mathematical formulation from the backpropagation through time, and then by separating these two gradients in the eligibility traces and the learning signal, we are actually creating these two types of signals. This schematically is shown here. There are the eligibility traces that it keeps maintaining this temporal information, and then we have the learning signals that they pass the information through the space. And as we calculate them, and this has a mathematical formulation behind, then we can update the weights while we are running the network only in the forward pass. Then we don't have to stop the execution in the network and roll the network and do the backward pass. And because we start from the mathematical formulation of the backpropagation to do this separation of the gradients, actually for some network cases, which is like the case of mainly the shallow networks, the gradients are equivalent with the backpropagation through time. This basically means that there is no, we don't sacrifice anything in the performance, because actually everything is equivalent in the backpropagation through time, but we only just run the network only in the forward pass without having to require to do the backward pass. So of course this has a lot of mathematical formulations and derivation inside. The key results for this, they have been published recently in our work in the transactional neural network and learning systems. Here I will just briefly summarize the results and what we have shown in order to demonstrate the performance of this online learning scheme. First of all, we have derived it for different types of neural models, not only for spiking neurons. This kind of approach is also applicable to LSTM, GRUs, or any other biological model. Here you can see basically the mathematical formulation for a SNU-based network. And what you see on the table below is how this kind of online learning schemes compare to backpropagation through time or to other also online schemes from the literature, where you can see what is like the achievable memory and time complexity. And as I mentioned, in some cases, the gradients that we achieve with our algorithms are equivalent to backpropagation through time. And also we have empirical computations of the time that it needs for different layer size. And we have empirically verified what it came from the analysis of mathematical analysis in terms of the time complexity. That's a function of n squared, with n being the number of units. Then we did an extensive analysis of this online learning scheme, and again for different type of applications, like here you can see music prediction and handwritten digit recognition and classification. Again, there are many results. We cannot go, unfortunately, in the detail on them. Just as a summary, we have verified the functionality of the scheme for different neural types like LSTMs, soft SNUs, and SNUs. And we have also compared it with different algorithms. Just to quickly see from what you can quickly see from these graphs is with the red are the results with backpropagation through time, and with the green are the results with our OSTL algorithm and different versions of the algorithm. And the important thing to see is like the performance with the backpropagation through time is like in most of the cases comparable. In some cases there is some loss in performance, and this because we have to do approximations in order to maintain the separation of the gradients in the temporal and the spatial domain. And with the blue bars is a comparison with online learning algorithms that they exist in the literature. Also more results here, tried the scheme both for word level language modeling and speech recognition here, where we did again an extensive analysis of how the USTL, again in the green, compares with the backpropagation time with red or with other algorithms in the literature. You can see that the results are similar with the backpropagation through time, and they in some cases improve performance with other online learning scheme. And there is a study here with the increasing number of the network layers and so on. Again, similar to the SNU, if you are interested more to try out this algorithm or use it as a basis, there is like a repository, GitHub repository, where we can see the basic aspects of the OSTL and some examples that can get you started to get familiar with the scheme. And this was like the section on the online learning. And what I have covered so far, it was mainly algorithmic. So it were algorithmic improvements in terms of how we can incorporate biologically inspired dynamics in neural network, or how we can utilize biologically inspired schemes in order to create new online learning algorithms. But of course, biology can also give inspiration to the design of new hardware paradigms. And I will very briefly introduce a concept that we are working in the lab, and it is called in-memory computing. The key inspiration for the in-memory computing from biology, it comes from the fact that our current computing system, they are based in the well-known von Neumann architecture, that what it means is like that the processing and the memory, they are separated to two different units. And for example, when there is a computation that it has to happen, some data, then the data are being transferred from the memory to the processing unit, and the results is transferred back to the to the memory. And this is like what is the well-known von Neumann bottleneck. But this way of operating with the processor and the memory being two separate units is not how our brain or how biology work. All these are like the computations, they are happening in place. And exactly this scheme is what the in-memory computing is trying to utilize, so that when there are certain operations, these to be performed inside the memory itself. So they are computing operations that they are happening in place, so they don't have to transfer the memory, the data from the memory to the processing unit, but the operation is happening in the memory itself, using the physical characteristics of the memory devices. And here there is like a very nice overview article where you can find even further information about that. And there are different types of devices that or memory devices that one can use in order to implement the in-memory computing, like SRAM, DRAM, and so on. In our lab, we are mainly working with phase change memory devices as the computing element of any memory computing system. And I will give like a little bit brief introduction of what the phase change memory devices are, that they are non-devices also used as memory itself, but they have like very nice characteristics that they can be used also as elements of in-memory computing system. The key feature of the phase change memory of PCM that is used is like that it can be in two different phases, the amorphous and the crystalline phase, and they have different electrical characteristics. For example, the amorphous phase is a disorder phase, meaning that it has a high resistance, and the crystalline is a more ordered phase, and it demonstrates low resistance. And actually one can transition from one phase to the other, so from crystalline to the amorphous, using electrical pulses. So using high current pulses, then one can reset and produce an amorphous volume inside the device, or using lower amplitude pulses called set or crystalline pulses, then one can create back the crystalline, the material to the crystalline phase. And besides the two extreme cases of the amorphous and crystallines, there are also all the intermediate phases that they can exist. And this is like what it makes the PCM device is like essentially to be an analog storage. So one can store different kind of levels, and the information, it can be stored in what is like this atomic arrangement inside these nanoscale devices. This is like the benefit that one can have in analog storage, but of course there are also all the known phenomena of drift and noise that they can affect the operation of the device. And this is like the key element of the in-memory computing that we are using in our hardware. And now I will just very briefly introduce how this kind of concept can be utilized when we are talking of implementing biologically inspired concept. I mean, the in-memory computing is also biologically inspired, but one can utilize it also to implement, for example, the integrate and fire neurons that we discussed before. And this is like some of our early work in order to say how this phase change memory can be used to implement biologically inspired neurons. And how this was done and demonstrated it is, as I said, basically in this kind of neurons, we have the membrane potential. If you can think that one can implement this membrane potential in this atomic configuration inside the phase change device that I mentioned. So like the neuron, it starts from the amorphous phase, and then it keeps receiving pulses, and then this amorphous volume is getting reduced until it gets fully crystalline. And these pulses that it receives, you can consider that are the input spikes that they are coming from the other neurons. So basically, by keep receiving these pulses, this is the integrate operation of the neurons. And when like threshold is reached, so then when by measuring the conductance of this device, then we cross a threshold, then the neuron will fire and then reset again, and then continue, integrate and fire. And then depending on how fast these input pulses are being applied, this basically can modulate what is the firing threshold of this integrate and fire neuron. So this is like the key concept, how utilize the physical properties of this device, since one can implement concepts of neurons. And what we have explored in this work also, beside this emulating the dynamic of the neuron using these devices, also to study the stochasticity of how this basically the noise of these devices is, it emulates also the stochasticity of biological neurons. And then we have studied how populations with this kind of stochasticity can be used for computations. And besides the neuron, one can use this together with the concept of SNU in order to implement a network, and having now the synapses as the devices in this in-memory computing concept. I don't have a lot of time to go in detail on this, but the main idea is, like, again, using the analog PCM devices now to store the information of the different synapses, and then we can do the computations of the multiply accumulate operations that they are needed in a neural network inside the memory without having to move the data around. I know this was very brief. I wanted just to give the main idea of the hardware concept. And this brings me to the last part, so that we can have some time for question and discussion also, which is the application part. And I have described these three different concepts, but what at the end is like the important is how this kind of concept can have an impact in AI applications and in our day-to-day life. And this is like what we want to demonstrate. And we have studied different kinds of application, starting from the simple benchmarks that I have demonstrated during the presentation, like classification and prediction, or different kind of concepts that we are working in our team. But where I would like to focus is like on a large scale application, something that it is currently used, for example, in several systems, that it is like the speech recognition. And I will briefly introduce what is this task. This is like what we call speech to text. So while now I am talking, there are several devices that they are performing the transcription of what I am talking to text. And this is like it is used in several applications. It's also applications in the cloud or at the edge, where like one would like to transcribe the speech text. The state-of-the-art network for this kind of application is what is called RNNT, recurrent neural network transducer. You see the architecture here. It consists of three different subnetworks. The two main ones is the prediction network and the encoding network. The encoding network, it basically does the feature encoding, taking the speech as the input. It encodes the features. And the prediction network, it is basically playing the role of the language model. And the key element of this kind of state-of-the-art network is like the LSTM unit. So what we have done is we have taken the variants that I described at the beginning of the SNU, and we replaced all the LSTM units of this big state-of-the-art network with SNUs, both in the encoding network and in the prediction network. And this is like visually you see with the orange or the yellow blocks in this diagram. And then we did a study of what is the performance of this network in this kind of speech transcription tasks. We studied basically both the encoder network and the prediction network, and what is the word error rate. This is the metric of the accuracy. Here it is the number of multiplications that they are needed. You can see basically for an LSTM-based network that we require around 56 million multiplication for that, which translates in an average inference time for a sequence of around 2.7 seconds. And I won't go to all the details. I will only state at the last, where basically, as I said, we took exactly the same network and we replaced with our SNU units both the encoder and the prediction network. And we achieve an order rate that is like around 2% less, but uses 50% of number of multiplication, and it has a reduction in the inference time of around 40%. So this is like really important, because you can understand, especially for this kind of task, you want that the transcription is coming really fast at the output. You don't want to have like big delay from the speech to the text. And then we are also continuing. Our latest results have even improved even further in terms of the performance, and we are now very close to the LSTMs, only 0.6% less, still maintaining these improvements in terms of the computational cost. And you can understand that this at the end also translates to energy efficiency when we are talking of implementing this kind of networks in the hardware. So I believe this is really interesting result, and I don't know if this is like another time. I believe it's the first time where we take a state-of-the-art architecture, which is like what is currently used in this kind of speech-to-text application, and we use biologically inspired dynamics, and we are able to achieve competitive performance and drastically reduce the number of the parameters of the model and the computational cost. And I would like to demonstrate what, because these are numbers here, what this means in practice. So I have a demo that I would like to show you. So I will play the demo. It's currently like a video of the demo, where you will see, basically, you will hear a sound, hopefully, and then you will see the transcription of the LSTM model and of our biologically inspired SNU model. And at the end, you will see the measure of the inference time.
It is clear that the world is being challenged with ever more complex problems to solve.
I hope you heard the sound, and you can see here that already the SNU model has started transcribing the text that you heard. This SNU has already finished. The LSTM model, it finished later, and you can see basically in the measure of the time that the inference time, it has this 40% benefits that I described in the previous chart. And I think this is like a work in progress. We are keep improving the performance with adding even further biologically inspired concept in this kind of architecture. And with that demonstration, I would like to acknowledge the great team in the Zurich lab and all the current, also former colleagues that they have contributed in this project. And thank you very much for your attention. And I will be really happy. Hope we have still some time that if there are any questions or discussions to have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very, very much for the very inspiring talk. It was great. Wow, it's a great area. So I would like to open this forum for questions and to have a discussion. And don't be shy. I mean, Angeliki can, yes, Apostole, you can please go on.
The usual thing that I don't have the microphone on. Thank you very much. It was a very, very interesting presentation and very exciting research. I actually have 3 questions for you. The first question has to do with the time envelope of the spiking neural networks, because it's not just over the threshold it fires. It has a certain kind of envelope that we don't know these things. We're working with Jota Poerazi, and we have modeled some such networks. And the question is, do you take that into account, or you have simplified the response time of the neural network? The second question has to do with the connectivity. You have the benefit, first of all, you have the benefit of being at IBM that has excellent technology all around. and you have the benefit of having your own hardware, which of course is really exciting. But in a realistic neural network, not everything will be connected to everything else. So would you like to comment a little bit on the question of connectivity and whether you can save resources by mapping a network that has maybe 70%, 50%, whatever that is connected? And the third and final question is, we had some good success with using FPGA technology to speed up, in this case, in the Sikievich model of spiking neural network. Have you considered using that kind of technology to speed up your calculations? Again, thank you very much. So I fired all three questions at the same time.
Thank you very much. Okay, so for the first question about the response time, I believe you mean the response time of the spike.
Right.
Okay, yes. So indeed, in this work, we haven't used like the spike is considered as an event, like it is like we haven't considered the response time here. There is like other work that we are doing where basically again it is not that for our work at the moment, what is like the shape, we haven't considered it a lot, but we are considering the timing between the spikes, or how one can efficiently transfer the information by encoding it into the timing of the spikes, which is something that I haven't discussed today though. So going to the second question related to the connectivity, I believe you refer to this kind of connectivity features here with between different kind of neurons, correct? So indeed, I mean, this is like the simplest in terms of implementation when there is no more complicated connectivity, but also the variants, these two variants that they are inspired for this kind of connectivity, they are much more efficient than what is like the state of the art of the LSTM. So basically, if you compare the SNU, even the simple SNU, but with the connectivities that I described, this is like even reducing the number of multiplications, because connectivity here means multiplications at the end. That's the main problem, how it translates when you map it. And this is actually where we get the benefit compared to the LSTM, that this kind of networks, they try to start simpler and expand according to the needs, rather than taking a very complicated structure like the LSTM and cover all different kind of approaches. So exactly this simplicity is what we try to use, and this is like what it gave the benefit of the, for example, in this speech-to-text application that I described at the end of the SNU compared to the LSTM, because we had 50% less multiplications, meant 50% less synapses at the end. That's how this has been achieved. And but still, by using the correct dynamics and the correct architectures, this is like what at the end is beneficial. And the last question regarding the FPGA, basically the first two parts of the talk that has to do with the SNU and the biologically inspired dynamics and the online learning, the benefits is these concepts are hardware agnostics. So the benefit that I have demonstrated on the speech to text at the end, it was with CPUs and not with the in-memory computing. So already then, if you use FPGAs and you have an optimized solution, then one can use on top these biologically inspired networks and have another 50% benefit on top of what the hardware provides. So it is not that it is run only with one hardware or only within memory computing. It's like, as we say, memory agnostic at the moment, that I think, yeah, we haven't worked, at least, I mean, in our team with FPGA, but I mean, there is I know that there exist works and in that front, and this kind of network can be applicable to this also.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting talk.
Thank you.
Rosso has also raised her hand. So Rosso, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation. I have two follow-up questions about the first two questions of Professor Dolas. You said that you consider the spikes, the spiking activity as events, but do you at least consider a refractory period, or the neurons are able to spike just, or maybe to be activated again just after the time they spike? Is the first question.
I mean, in this specific model, the refractory period was not there. As I said, there is like another part of the work that we have used the refractory period. The only part and the only dynamics in terms of time that we are considering, and one can think of it as a hyperparameter, is like the leak term. So like the membrane potential, it keeps accumulating, but if there is no activity, it decays. Correct? It doesn't keep the value. So this is the case. This is like the temporal dynamic inside the neuron that we have actually in all of the variants. This is this loop here. The refractory period is something that one can add, no, in this kind of dynamics. We haven't in this specific part of the work, we haven't included it.
Okay, thank you. And the second question. It's related to slide 9, where you saw some results that it seems to me that, so now I can notice that this SNU, I thought it was a SNU, so the action axonic model, that it's, because I've noticed anyway that the first two bars are very close to each other. So I thought it was the extended model of the SNU. And my question was, how would you comment that there is not such an improvement from the bare model, the simple model and the extended one?
Yes, no, specifically here is not the SNU. These first two slides are the simpler SNU, is a comparison of SNU and soft SNU. So this means that the communication here is happening with spikes, and the communication here is happening with analog values. Basically, the results are comparable because actually with spikes, one had to increase the layers to get a better performance. So if we want to compare the SNU with the soft SNU, always, except in one application, always when you transmit the analog value, you get better results. There was some applications that the spiking had even improved performance. The ASNU, the adaptive SNU, which actually I didn't go too much detail of what it is like the adaptive threshold SNU. So the difference of this unit to this unit is like that the threshold is not constant as it's here, but based on the activity of the other neuron, it is changing, increasing or reducing. In this study, it was only used in the speech to text at the end, where I don't have in the slides, but it is in the paper, the comparison of the adaptive and the output SNU and the SNU. So there is in the paper here the comparison of the different units also, but I haven't included here in the slides. At the end, the best performance was with the output SNU, and I kept only this line here.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a little.
Actually, you see there is one comparison with the adaptive SNU here. Yeah, but not the full comparison. But yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I have also some questions. If there is no other question from the audience. So I was wondering, Angeliki, if for a specific application for music or text recognition, etc., if you try to see what will be the function connectivity patterns that have the most dominant impact on the performance. Like one of the things that I'm very curious is how the function connectivity encodes the various information. This is what I'm really very interested in. So while I was listening to your talk, I was curious to see if in these models that you found a great performance, if you proceed to analyze if there were some special connectivity patterns that perhaps had impact on that performance. Like if you could see some groups of large size or small size or of specific connectivity patterns that you thought that they may have, they could be related to the performance that you are observing.
Yes, actually, this is like this is a very interesting question. It is like an ongoing study up to now. For example, even with this application, we have studied these 3 different kind of units and connectivity partners, because one is like connecting to the output, and also we have tried different architecture. Here, basically, we did a study. This is like a single application, and then we did a study of the different connectivity partners and see what is like the best for this specific application. But I believe what it is like at the end important is like how these relate with the different applications. So I believe depending on what is the applications or what are the features at the input and what you want to at the end achieve, this is like it will at the end define what is like the required architecture and the connectivity. So like it is a part of an ongoing study how one can link, besides like do a study of the performance by either hyperparameter search or different kind of connectivity of what it gets best, to get more of an understanding of the functionality of the neurons and how they relate with the demand of the different applications. And yeah, this is like an interesting question, but it is like still there's not a clear answer to this. So certainly, for example, one can say intuitively when you have an adaptive threshold and then you change it, this may be more beneficial with applications where the input changes. Sometimes it is like more fast or coming more input together, or it is like more sparse. But we haven't done the study, but it is important.
All right. Okay. There is, thank you. There is also a question from Nikos Malakasis, who thanks you for the great talk. And he is wondering whether you have tried implementing multiple dendritic structures, either active or passive, in these SNUs.
Yes, this is also very interesting. I mean, there were some thoughts or discussion around that, but we haven't tried, but it is actually something that the framework of SNU, that's like the important, this framework can be expanded to capture this. And then similarly, like the other variants, one can add the different kind of dendritic dynamics too in the same structure. But we haven't tried it.
All right. Well, I'll take the liberty to ask you a second, maybe last question, if there are no other questions from the audience. So I actually see a lot of students, and most of them are from computer science. And I was wondering if you could highlight a question that you think that can be very inspiring for a PhD student for a new research. Like if you were to do your PhD now, you know, with all the knowledge and experience that you have, what would be the thesis topic that you would decide to work on?
Yes, Oh, it's an interesting question. I guess the answer is different for everyone. So, and like this, I hope with this talk that I capture different kind of areas where one could focus would like to focus their research. Is actually, from what I have seen, is the topic is so broad and so many interesting things that the difficulty is to choose at the end. And there are so many opportunities to do great research there. For me personally, because I am also coming from a control background, if I come back to these initial challenges and features, it is like more towards the first part, how all these dynamics, because like and the architecture of the system can have an impact to AI application. So because we keep saying these are and try to understand the things that they are there in the neuroscience and in biology, but we are only at the beginning in order to have an understanding of how this specific aspect will have an impact and which of these aspects will have an impact. So more towards to this biologically inspired dynamics for me personally. But of course, several topics in terms of learning are important. The hardware, because all of these at the end, they have to be implemented in efficient hardware. So there are many interesting topics around that in memory computing or any other type of neuromorphic hardware. So I believe this research around brain-inspired computing, it is so interdisciplinary that there is like a broad spectrum of things.
Mm-hmm. So if I can rephrase you, what you are saying is that I mean, at least, you know, in your opinion, it is very important to go back to, let's say, neuroscience and try to see the different biological paradigms, and then perhaps try to see how we can apply them in the architectures or in the hardware. So I think that you emphasize the role of the computation neuroscience.
Yes, I believe that that was the topic of the whole talk, that at the end we need to merge aspects. I mean, we cannot replicate, we have seen this in several aspects, we cannot replicate neuroscience or nature, but it will be, I believe, beneficial to take this inspiration. But then, but to merge it, what are the advances currently in the AI? So I think what it will bring us the best result is like to take this inspiration from the neuroscience and the things that they keep evolving, and not separate it from the advances in machine learning and what has happened up to now. Try to find the path to merge and take the benefits of both.
Right. Actually, that's why I asked the previous question, because the way that I was thinking of your talk would be like one potential project would be to try to see what are the connectivity patterns that you observe when you examine the performance of some architectures, and then go back to the neuroscience data, to the biological data, and try to see, do we see similar patterns when we analyze data from, let's say, related experiments? Of course, this is not easy, because, you know, how to develop an experiment and then perform this, you know, like a neuroscientific experiment is a very difficult task. But try to see if, for example, from the neuroscience, you see some patterns. Like,
exactly. And I hope things are coming out from our collaboration.
Exactly.
Because it is like this merging of the two worlds and putting joint forces, let's say, here. It will be interesting to see how it evolves. So I'm really looking forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so do I. So thank you all for this discussion and for being here. Thank you very much, especially you, Angeliki, for taking the time from your very busy schedule to give us this talk. It was brilliant, and thank you. Thank you, really.
Thank you very much. Feel free also, everyone, to reach out if there are more things that you would like to discuss. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful.
Thank you
Bye,
very much.
guys.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.